So the rest of us, we can now turn in our Bible to 1 Peter chapter 3. Our text for today is verses 5 through 6. We are going to conclude our discussion of the evangelistic wife today, and then we'll move on next week to the evangelistic husband in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 7. So I titled today's sermon, The Heritage of Evangelistic Wives. So with that in mind, let's look at verses 5 through 6 together. Let's remember that this is the perfect word of our God, that this word is sure and steadfast. It's true. It alone can make us wise. So let's approach this word with expectation. The word of God says to us in 1 Peter chapter 3, starting in verse 5, "For this is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, by submitting to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. And you are her children if you do good and do not fear anything that is frightening." This is the word of the Lord. Last week we talked about the power of evangelistic wives, or the power of Christian wives. And what we discovered is that the power of Christian wives is not found in their ungodly words. So manipulative words or threatening words, coercive words, nagging words. The power of the women of this world is found in their words when they tell their husbands that they better do what they've told or else, or "I told you so." That's the power of the women of this world, but that's not the power of Christian wives. The power of Christian wives is not in their ungodly words, nor is it found in their external beauty. Now, that's not to say external beauty and ungodly words aren't powerful. They're actually very powerful. Think about external beauty. If you were to summarize the marketing strategy of every single company, you would probably describe it as an appeal to external beauty. It's what we see constantly on commercials and Twitter ads and YouTube ads. It's an appeal to external beauty. We've seen this constantly in high school and in our communities. We see that beautiful women get more power. They get the power to serve themselves. But that's how the women of this world get power, through their ungodly words and their external beauty. And all those things are powerful. They are not powerful to save souls. The power of external beauty is merely external. It is merely able to orchestrate external events. It is unable to orchestrate internal transformation. But gentleness, for our wives in this room, a gentle and quiet spirit is powerful to orchestrate salvation because it's a picture of Christ. And that's what we reflected on during communion. We reflected on how it was Jesus' gentleness and his submission to the Father's plan. He did not ride into Jerusalem defiant, aggressive, shaking his fists at the Father. He did not ride into Jerusalem cursing sinners. He rode into Jerusalem gentle. So when the wives in this room root their power in their gentle and quiet spirit, they have the power to transform their husbands, like we saw with Godfrey and Felicia, because Felicia was a picture of Jesus to her husband. And although Godfrey had heard the gospel, he saw it in a powerful way through his wife's behavior, and that saved his soul. So we learned last week about the power of evangelistic wives. Today, we are going to talk about the heritage of evangelistic wives. So I have a few slides on the back. We described gentle and quiet. I referred to it often merely as gentleness, but it refers to a welcoming attitude of submission that produces rest and peace. That's what it is. So for our wives, our Christian wives in the audience, a gentle and quiet spirit that Peter is referring to is a welcoming attitude of submission that produces rest and peace. It is the opposite of aggression or defiance. Rather, it's welcoming and it produces peace. So gentleness is the power of evangelistic wives, but it's also the heritage. And that's the main point for this week's sermon. So if we were to summarize the main idea, we would say gentle and quiet spirit is the heritage of evangelistic wives. And when I speak of heritage, I'm speaking about the concept of an inheritance. Like your heritage is what you get from your ancestors. And what we see in these verses 5 and 6 of 1 Peter 3, is that this is the identity that's been handed down to our Christian wives in this room. So with this in mind, this main idea that gentleness is the heritage of evangelistic wives, let's explore it in verses 5 through 6. So the first point is gentleness is the heritage of evangelistic wives. Look at verse 5. Peter says, "For this is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves by submitting to their own husbands." What we see in verse 5 is we see that this is the reason why women should refuse to root their power in their external beauty. Because the draw for Christian wives to find power in their beauty is strong. But there is a reason why you should refuse that. And the answer is verse 5. We see it because of the word for. Not for, F-O-U-R, or the number 4, but for, F-O-R, which often signals in the New Testament the reason why you should do something. We could say, because. Why should you Christian wives refuse to find your power in your external beauty? Because of what Peter says in verse 5. And if we were to summarize this, it would be because that's not your heritage. Finding your power to get what you want in your external beauty is not who you are. That's how Cleopatra was, for you history people out there, who exercised her external beauty to actually get immense power over Julius Caesar and over Antony, and perhaps even an attempt over Octavian. Like immense power Cleopatra wielded. Why? Not because of her gentleness, but because of her external beauty. Think about Hollywood. Think about every single movie we watch, which constantly women in these movies are exercising power, even great power, because of their attractiveness. Again, think about our economy. Our capitalistic economy, if you were to ask what are some of the values that drive our economy, one of them would be external beauty. External beauty moves us to spend billions and billions of dollars on clothes and a variety of things. If we were to summarize marketing strategy, it would be appeal to external beauty. You're not tempted to buy gum because of a wife's gentleness, are you? You're not moved to buy a new car because of a wife's inner beauty. Rather, it is this appeal to external beauty. But that's not your heritage. Wives in this room, although that's everywhere, and although this world tries to seduce you daily to do that, that is not your heritage. It's not what it means to be a part of the family of God. It's not what your ancestors did. Rather, what we learn in these verses that gentleness is where your power is found. And we see that submission is the expression of gentleness. And when our wives submit in a godly way, they are orchestrating and expressing their power. Now, there is an ungodly type of submission, and let's be clear about that. There's even an ungodly type of submission that can express itself in the home. This happens in instances where wives are told by their husbands to not report crimes or their sinful behavior. For a wife to submit in those ways would be ungodly and actually a sin. For a wife in the context of a marriage to submit to her husband because the husband commanded her to participate in sin would also be an ungodly expression of submission. Rather, we say godly submission. Gentleness expresses itself in godly submission. And just so we're all clear, I have a description on the board about what godly submission is. Submission is the proclivity and the act of following your husband's leadership with joy, especially when you disagree. Because is submission even involved when you agree? Like, submission is a proclivity, a tendency, a heart inclination to follow your husband's leadership even when you disagree. Perhaps this might be helpful. Submission welcomes a husband's leadership. It does not challenge it. So these are three ways to describe what gentleness produces for our evangelistic Christian wives. A gentle and quiet spirit, an attitude that produces rest, leads to submissive acts. So this is the heart condition and the act of following your husband's leadership with joy, especially when you disagree. Submission welcomes a husband's leadership. It does not challenge it. And at this point, we run into a major problem, I think, in this conversation. In my experience, most of the times we talk about submission, a husband's role in marriage, a wife's role in marriage. One of the problems we run into is we begin to focus exclusively, and that's an important word, exclusively, on what acts qualify as submissive. So what acts are submissive? What acts are unsubmissive? Now, there's some good in focusing on what acts are in the submissive category and what acts are in the unsubmissive category. So let's be clear. If your husband is attempting to lead you in a way that's not sinful, he's attempting to lead you, and you respond to that leadership with sin, then that is by definition not submissive. Let's even think of what we would think of traditionally as submissiveness. You have a wife who cooks every meal for her husband, cleans the house meticulously. That's what our traditional conservative values say the wife's role is to do. Say we have a woman who does all of those things and yet is gossiping about her husband, and yet bitter toward her husband, constantly thinking in her mind, well, I'm going to show you. Like, it doesn't matter what external acts she's doing, she's not being submissive. So we could put a bunch of acts in the non-submissive category, and here is the key. If you're responding to your husband's leadership with sin, you are not being submissive. Now, there's also acts that are always in the submissive category. If you are responding to your husband's leadership with godliness. So some examples might be prayer, a gentle word. Perhaps you're quick to listen, slow to speak, abounding in mercy. Then those are submissive acts by definition. Now we could think of a non-traditional example here. Say you have the husband who's cooking and washing the dishes, and perhaps maybe even the wife is making some of the money or all of the money for the household. If that wife is still welcoming her husband's leadership, then you have a submissive wife. So, there are examples that clearly fall in the non-submissive category and acts that clearly fall in the submissive category. But if we are only focusing on what acts fit in either category, we're in danger. We're actually in danger of producing a lot of confusion in the hearts of our wives in this audience. And the reason why is because there are millions of actions and millions of responses that a wife has to her husband's leadership that is neither sinful or godly. I think about my wife, and one of the examples that's becoming like a legend in our family is there was a time when we were in seminary. I don't know how long ago it was, maybe 10 years ago. Crazy how time flies. And we were very poor. I mean, to be very clear, we were very poor. And my wife was shopping, And typically we didn't buy snack foods, Cheez-Its and Vanilla Nells and these kinds of things. And my wife really wanted Cheez-Its. And she was looking at the Cheez-Its. And she was paralyzed by the thought, wondering, if I buy the Cheez-Its, am I being unsubmissive? That's what she was thinking. So my question to you is, if she bought the Cheez-Its, was she being submissive or not? In that moment, it's probably hard to tell. It's just buying Cheez-Its. God doesn't say in Deuteronomy, you shall not buy Cheez-Its, right? He doesn't say that, or you shall buy Cheez-Its. So how does my wife, as a godly woman, make the decision about whether or not she should buy Cheez-Its or not? Well, I think there's two ways. I think she could ask herself, am I welcoming my husband's leadership right now? Or am I defying it? Or perhaps even we go this further. What if she bought the Cheez-Its? I can't remember if you did or not. She bought the Cheez-Its, and I came home and found Cheez-Its. If I would have said, honey, we can't afford Cheez-Its this month. And she would have said, you never give me anything I want, you take them back. Okay, that response would have proven that the act of buying Cheez-Its was not submissive. Why? Because when given the opportunity, she defied my leadership. She did not welcome it. But if I said, honey, we're really struggling this month, $3 Cheez-Its, we think you need to take them back. And she said, of course I will. Well, then she was being submissive. So we run into a problem if we're constantly just thinking about what acts fit in the submissive category or the non-submissive category. Rather, it's much more helpful to focus on the heart. Our wives in this room, is your heart just welcoming the leadership of your husband? Or does your heart despise it, regardless of what kind of act you can manipulate? Perhaps you despise the leadership, but you've trained yourself so well to put on a smile and to do it. That will rot your marriage. It will rot your marriage. You might think you could exercise your power through a fake smile. It's not powerful. It's not powerful to save a husband. It's not powerful to keep a marriage. So we run into a major problem when we do that, guys. And I would just ask, I would implore you, I would even challenge you guys to focus on your heart. Is your heart welcoming your husband's leadership, or is it defying it? So perhaps I'm convinced that all of our wives in this audience are thinking, I want to be a godly woman. I want to be like Christ. I know it's difficult, but I want to honor him. So a great question is, how do you cultivate this kind of gentleness? How do you cultivate a gentle and quiet spirit that expresses itself in submission? And I think the answer is found in verse 6. Or verse 5, sorry. It says in verse 5, for this is how the holy woman who hoped in God. Who hoped in God. Now, hope is a difficult word for us to comprehend. In our context, we say, I hope, like a wish. So I thought, I hope Everton beats Arsenal. Yes. For those of you who don't know, my favorite team's like in last place. And that's not a good place to be in English soccer, because that means you get kicked out of the best league. It's not like in football where you could be the Cincinnati Bengals and be in last place for years and then all of a sudden have a good year and be in the playoffs. You can't do that in England. If you're in the last places, you get kicked out. How's that for discipline? You've been naughty. You're out of the league. Everton has been in last place. And I told Bart, I ain't watching anymore. Don't talk to me about it. I don't want to see it. I don't want it. And Arsenal, that's Bart's favorite team's in first place. And my team's in last place. And Bart was like, we should watch the game. And I said, not a chance. I will not put into practice what I'm teaching about friendship. You are not my friend on Saturday. But Everton won. 1-0. Oh, man. So excited. Okay, now back to why did I tell you all of that? Because I hoped that Everton would win. And what I meant by that is I was wishing. I wished they would win. That's it. It was just a wish. You would have said, do you think they're going to win? I would have said, no. What do you think the score is going to be? Hopefully 4-0 or less. Like hopefully, yeah, a wish. But that's not how hope is in the Bible. Hope is not a wish. So when this verse says that their hope is in God, it's not like a woman is following her husband and just wishing that God will reward her. It's not like I just wish. It's not probable. It might not even be possible, but I hope God rewards this incredible act of bravery. No. Hope in the Bible is a firm expectation that something's unseen is going to become seen. That's something that you don't possess, you will possess. So what is going to fuel our wives to adopt a gentle and quiet spirit that moves them to incredible acts of submissiveness, which is brave and strong and courageous, is none other than their hope in God. You wives will be gentle when your hope is in God. If your hope is in this world, if this hope is in your comfort, if this hope is in your economic status, you're not going to do any of this. But if your hope is in God, that He exists, that He is trustworthy, and that He really will reward these wives who bravely submit unto their husbands, not unto sin, but unto the Lord, if that's where your hope is, then it's going to fuel this kind of submission. It's going to fuel a heart. It's going to motivate a heart that welcomes your husband's leadership rather than challenging it. So when we talk about submissiveness, non-submissiveness, are you submitting? Are you not submitting? Let's not be legalistic Pharisees. Hey, you did something on the bad list. Let's not act like that, guys. The better question to ask is, where is your hope? Wives, as you struggle with following your husband, and of course the same idea is, as we as citizens struggle following our government. In this context, as slaves struggled with following their masters, in a passage like Hebrews chapter 13, as you church members struggle following your pastor. Because believe it or not, that will be a struggle sometimes. You might think you know better than me, and you might. But as you struggle in following your pastor, the better question is, where is your hope? Is your hope in being said that you are right? Is your hope found in your ability to grab power? Is your hope found in your ability to orchestrate your own destiny? Is your hope found in your ability to control things so you can guarantee your cause and you will not be like Christ, who rode into Jerusalem gentle and lowly, mounted on a donkey, not coming to fight and pulverize sinners, but coming to welcome sinners to have peace. So all of us in our various contexts, and today, evangelistic wives, as you embrace this, you show the world Christ. I'm asking that you would do this, that your hope in God would motivate you to show this world Jesus. Now let's be clear. Verse 6 tells us, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, and you are her children if you do good and do not fear anything that is frightening. Let's be very clear. This is scary. I want to be very sensitive to the wives in this room and say, I understand the call to follow your husband can be scary. In this context, it's following an unbelieving husband, which is even more scary. This is a frightening thing. Therefore, traditional values won't be powerful enough for you to submit. Conservative ideals aren't going to be powerful enough motivations for you to submit. Because of the fear and how scary this can be, the only thing able to motivate and fuel this kind of life is hope in God. That's it. And if you're not hoping in God, you're not going to do this. You're not going to embrace your heritage. You will follow Cleopatra and the women of this world, and you will not follow your spiritual mothers. It's scary to give up control. But God is true, right? Because if God's not true, this is oppressive and immoral, and this is an assault on you women. But if God is true, right? Like if it's true when God says, your gentle and quiet spirit is very precious to me. If that's true, then this is actually your pathway to freedom and liberation. Many of you know Margaret Crum. It's crazy to think that some of you don't, isn't it? For some of our members who've been here for a while. Margaret Crum was here for 15 years, an incredibly amazing woman, served in our children's ministry, lived right across she lived in our parking lot because her house had a door into our parking lot, basically. And she would just walk over, and she was here all the time. We all love Margaret. Some of you don't know her, though. She recently moved to Texas, and before she made this decision, she came down and she was very sad. She did not want to move to Texas. She didn't want to move. You know why? Because of you guys. She loved her church. She loved her church family. She didn't want to move. She had 15 years of life in this church with you guys, intimacy with you guys, serving alongside you guys, learning with you guys, carrying your burdens, you carrying her burden, and you know her eye burden that she had last year, which spanned about an entire year. Like, you guys know that she did not want to move, but her husband did. And she didn't know what to do. She was tempted to say, you move, I'll stay here. She wanted to say that. And she came down and we talked. And I said, Margaret, you have every right and you should gently tell him your concerns. Tell him why you don't want to move. Gently and lovingly tell him why. Ask for him to consider your concerns and then pray for him. But if he says you need to move, Margaret, you need to move. It was scary for Margaret to do it. Even now, she's kind of lonely there. So that's an encouragement to you to call her. Like, just because she's in Texas, she's now no longer a part of our church family here, but she's still a part of our family, right? So we still have an obligation to care her. She's lonely right now. She's experiencing the pain of submitting to her husband and moving to Texas. And she should have moved. She needed to move because there's nothing sinful about moving to Texas, whether or not you think it or not. There's nothing sinful about moving to Texas. There's nothing sinful about moving to California. Her husband was not leading her to sin. Her husband was leading her, and she needed to follow. And it was enough for Margaret, because when I talked to her the other day, I asked her, can I use this illustration? Would you give me permission? And she said yes, if it would be helpful. She said to me, Anthony, I didn't want to move, but I wanted to obey Jesus more. She said something like that. I would rather obey Jesus, kind of sad in Texas, than be here disobeying Jesus. What a powerful illustration of a wife who followed her husband despite the fear. And it's enough for Margaret to know that she is pleasing God because of her address. That right now, God is looking at her and saying, beautiful and precious, your inner beauty, Margaret. Like, that delight in Margaret is enough for Margaret. And that's glorious. Think about it. My kids, you know when they're most happy, I think? When I'm like, Asher, I'm proud of you. And he looks at me and he says, why? And I say, because you have been brave. And he just has such a smile. Or I say, Lila, I love you. Why? Because you are my sweetheart. And they're just so excited. Why? Because their daddy is pleased with them. Well, it's enough for Margaret that her daddy is pleased with her, why she moved. But you know what's happening? Margaret told me this. Her husband's not a believer. Her son is not a believer. The two people she lives with now in Texas, they're now going to church. She told me that her husband, I'm pretty sure these were her words, my husband has been in church more with me since we've been in Texas, which is like 6 months, than he was for 40 years of our marriage in California. I don't know what God's going to do through that. I hope it's on to salvation. But her husband, this is what happened. It's the same thing with Godfrey and Felicia. What happened is her husband saw Margaret follow him when she didn't want to, but she did it with gentleness, and it is attractive. She is now attracting her husband and her son to Jesus. That's what's happening. And that's your heritage, women. Don't be seduced. Don't be lied to by this world to find your beauty and your power in your words, ungodly words like nagging words, threatening words, I told you so words. Don't put your beauty there. Don't put your power there. Don't put your power in your external adornment. Don't do it. Those are powerful things, but they're not powerful enough to please God, and they're not powerful enough to orchestrate heart transformation. I am begging of you, adopt your heritage. This is what your family does. This is what the women of your family do. Be like them. Don't be like Cleopatra. Don't be like the women of this world. This is your heritage. And this is also your legacy. This is my second point. The legacy of an evangelistic wife. So, a heritage is something you receive, but a legacy is something you give, right? This is your opportunity, wives. You have an opportunity to give a legacy to the women in this church. The wives of this church need a model like Felicia. They need a model like Margaret. They need to look about a church and they need to see wives who are gentle and quiet and submissiveness, not quiet like their mouth is closed. We talked about that. This is one idea, a gentle quietness, which means a welcoming attitude. That's what's being described here. These women, they need to see models of wives who are rooting their power and their heritage in their gentleness. You have an opportunity to give a legacy. Your own families, your own nuclear families need this. They need a model of wives who don't buy into the feminist ideals of this world. They need to see wives who actually trust God and who hope in God. So I would challenge you, would you adopt this legacy today? What's powerful enough to bring joy to the lost? It's this heritage. What's powerful enough to bring joy to your family? It's this heritage. What's powerful enough to build up your families? It's this heritage. What is powerful enough to give you future rewards? It is this heritage. And what has the power to spread the glory of God? It is this heritage and nothing else. Would you commit to this being your legacy, ladies? And perhaps there's a non-Christian here, somebody who doesn't know Jesus. Like you might have heard what I said and you might have thought, what an oppressive man. What an immoral man up there. And I would say you're exactly right if God isn't true. If God is not true, and if he is not trustworthy, everything I said is utterly oppressive. But what I said is actually utterly liberating. And we know it because of the cross. Because at the cross, we see Jesus submitting unto death in the most dangerous of circumstances, submitting unto the Father. And through that submission, we see the greatest thing in the world, the salvation of sinners. And I'm telling you, ladies, God has uniquely designed you in your families to model Jesus as you submit in scary situations. As you do that, you will spread the glory of God to the lost. That's your heritage. So for non-Christians, I would say the gospel actually makes this true and good and fulfilling. And I'd ask that you would come to Jesus. You come to Jesus by confessing him as your Lord and believing in your heart that God raised him from the dead. I'd ask that you would do that today. Let's pray. God, as we have this moment of invitation, I pray, God, that you'd be at work in our wives, also in our husbands and every member of this church, that we would all in solidarity embrace this vision and encourage our wives to live it out for the sake of your glory and for the sake of the joy of the lost. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Like last week, this is a time of response, and there's lots of ways to respond. You could respond by coming up to the kneeling benches, having prayer with my wife, myself, or Bart. You could turn to the person next to you and pray with them. There are lots of ways to respond to this message. However God is leading you to respond, though, do so now.